are courts that have got decisions wrong. There have been wrongful convictions. Sometimes DNA evidence that's come to light years later has shown that a conviction made decades earlier was unjust and the prisoner should be released. Or sometimes there have been the best of intentions, but mistakes have been made. Sometimes there has been a terrible, awful, intentional miscarriage of justice. Famous cases, call them out. The Chamberlain case. Sorry, that was the one that went to your mind. Yeah, that's the one that I thought of that really... It was 1980 that Lindy Chamberlain was arrested, charged with murdering her baby Azaria. I was in year 10 at school. Years later, I got to know the journalist Malcolm Brown. We'll put his photo up on the page on the screen here. He covered the Chamberlain case for the Sydney Morning Herald. When the verdict of the jury was handed down in the Alice Springs courtroom that Lindy was guilty of murdering her baby Azaria, Malcolm, the whole court was silent, gasping, and Malcolm involuntarily said aloud of the jury, "You pack of despicable bastards." Wow. He has publicly written many times of the extraordinary travesty of justice that led to Lindy Chamberlain's jailing. He's written of the less than professional response of the police. He's criticised the policeman who moved the baby's clothing without first having it photographed. He's criticised the forensic pathologist who said that he could discern the print of a bloodied hand of a young adult on the jumpsuit, but later conceded he hadn't tested whether that material was blood, and it turned out not to be blood. He's criticised the police who asserted that a spray pattern identified on the dashboard of the Chamberlain's car was evidence of blood spurting from a baby's artery, but the court later found that the spray wasn't blood, it was sound deadening material that was applied during manufacture to all that series of vehicles. He's critical of the Australian public who went along and formed a mob view and judged her as guilty. And people of my generation remember that awful miscarriage of justice and the devastation on that young mum who was jailed wrongly and wrongfully convicted of the murder of her baby. But you know, that wasn't the worst miscarriage of justice. Even that miscarriage of justice pales into insignificance when compared with the trial that we're looking at this morning, the trial of Jesus in these 9 verses. I called today's talk, "What is your decision?" Because just look at verse 66. That's the question that the corrupt high priest Caiaphas turns to the corrupt court and asks the question, what is your decision? Now, I'm not Caiaphas and you're not the Sanhedrin, but we're going to ask each other that question, that what is your decision? And so we're in this journey through Matthew's Gospel. It's been a 3-4 year journey. We've taken a break for a couple of months. Today is the start of our major Term 1 series. We're calling it The Week That Changed the World. We're going to run through the trial of Jesus, the crucifixion, the resurrection, and then the commissioning of his disciples. And today it's the trial, and it's positioned actually between the narrative on the betrayal of Jesus by Judas and then really Peter failing to back up Jesus, and that's what we're going to look at next week. I just want to give you a bit of background before we come to the heart of the issue. I want to come back with me to Daniel. So it's just a little bit before, that much before in my Bible, to Daniel chapter 7. I think Daniel chapter 7 is one of the most important chapters in the whole of the Old Testament. And community group leaders, can I just say, if there's ever a night in community group when you're stuck and we've just got one extra night and we don't know what to do this week, go and do a study on Daniel 7, because it's so rich, so important in terms of understanding background to Jesus. I just want to give you this little bit for a moment. Just come back to Daniel 7, chapter 1, and all will become clear in a minute. In the first year of King Belshazzar of Babylon, Daniel had a dream with visions in his mind as he was lying in his bed. He wrote down the dream, and here is the summary of his account. Daniel said, "In my vision at night I was watching. Suddenly the four winds of heaven stirred up the great sea. 4 huge beasts came up out of the sea, each different from the other. The first was like a lion, but had eagle's wings. I continued watching until its wings were torn off. It was lifted from the ground, set on its feet like a man, and given a human mind. Suddenly another beast appeared, a second one that looked like a bear. It was raised up on one side with 3 ribs in its mouth. Between its teeth it was told, 'Get up, gorge yourself on flesh.'" Beast after beast after beast, doing despicable things to the other beasts and others around. Verse 6, "After this I was watching, suddenly another beast appeared. It was like a leopard with 4 wings of a bird on its back. It had 4 heads and was given dominion." 7, "After this I was watching in the night visions. Suddenly a 4th beast appeared, frightening, dreadful, incredibly strong, with large iron teeth. It devoured and crushed, and it trampled with its feet whatever was left. It was different from all the beasts before. It had 10 horns." These beasts represent different powers, different authorities, various authorities that operate in the world, and different, could be an employer, could be a government, could be an army, could be a court. I mean, each one kind of out of control, each one running their area of the world on top of, it was the Babylonian Empire, it was the Syrian Empire, it was the Roman Empire, it was the British government, it was the American government, it was the Democrats, it was the Republicans, it was the Liberals, it was the Labor, it was all the different authorities that we've seen over the centuries, over the millennia. And I kept watching in this chaos of government after government. Government rise up, the power of China rises up, the power of Russia goes back. As you see the different beasts rising and falling in their influence, and the chaos and turbulence as, well, the government of Germany, it looks so stable, and then it isn't, and the ups and the downs. And in that chaos, in that ups and downs of world history, verse 9, come to verse 9. "Suddenly," I kept watching, "suddenly thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat." Now, this is a description of moving from the ups and downs of world powers to the final moment of judgment at the end of time. In the chaos of all these autonomous governments going up and down, the heavenly courtroom is set up. This is the last day of the universe. And the judge of the universe takes his clothing was white like snow, the hair of his head like whitest wool. His throne with flaming fire and wheels blazing fire. Verse 10, "A river of fire was flowing, coming out of his presence." We've gone from chaos to calm. Thousands and thousands served him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was convened. This is the judge of all the earth about to do his thing. The books were opened. I watched then because of the sound of the arrogant words the horn was speaking. I continued watching. The beast was killed, its body destroyed. The devil is defeated and given over to the burning fire. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was removed, but an extension of life was granted to them for a certain period of time. All those who are arrogantly defying God are judged. Verse 13, "I continued watching in the night visions, and suddenly one like a son of man." Just remember that expression, one like a son of man, was coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days. He was escorted before him, and this one like a son of man was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, so that those of every people and nation and language should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass. All these other authorities, they come and go, they're up and down, they're in season, they're out of season. One moment it's Pol Pot, next moment it's Ronald Reagan. But this one like a son of man, his dominion's everlasting, will not pass away. Kingdom is one that will not be destroyed. Now, right from that moment, back in Daniel 7, 850 BC, the Jewish mindset, we're looking forward to this day when the Ancient of Days will take their seats. We're looking forward to the end of chaotic government when the Lord Almighty takes his seat and one like a son of man would come and he'd be given all dominion and all nations would serve him and they'd serve him forever. And hold that thought. We turn now to point 3. Skip forward 800 years from Daniel to the time of Jesus, come back to Matthew 26, and it's this false corrupt trial. We know it's going to be a false corrupt trial because actually if you look back to chapter 26 verse 3, the chief priests and the elders of the people, we did this last year, assembled in the courtyard of the high priest who was named Caiaphas, and they conspired to arrest Jesus in a treacherous way and kill him. Right back from the start of chapter 26, we've known this is not going to be a fair court case. But just picking up our narrative today, Jesus has just been betrayed in the Garden of Gethsemane, taken to the house of the high priest. It's going to be a corrupt trial. How do we know it's going to be a corrupt trial? How do we know there's something stinky going on here? Well, first, the trial happens at the judge's home, not at the temple. Second, Jesus is facing a capital offence and he's not offered a defence attorney. You're supposed to be offered a defence attorney if you're getting if this kind of thing. Third, Jesus will be charged with blasphemy, but he doesn't legally blaspheme. He doesn't even mention the name of God. Fourth, trials involving capital punishment had to be conducted over 2 days. And fifth, you don't do court cases at night. You don't. You don't in our day, you don't in their day. I was reading about the Sam Kerr case this week in the UK, and one of the commentators in the Herald made the observation, nothing good happens after midnight. And that is true. Nothing good happens after... If you're doing a court case at that time of night, this is bodgy. It doesn't stop these guys. They know what evidence they want. They're convinced of Jesus' guilt. They're looking for the evidence to get there. Let's meet the characters. 57. Those who'd arrested Jesus led him away to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the scribes and the elders had convened. Peter was following at a distance, right to the high priest's courtyard. He went in, sitting with the servants to see the outcome. We're going to meet firstly, I'm going to call him corrupt Caiaphas. 57. He had pre-decided the verdict, abuses his religious authority, manipulates justice, prioritises power over truth. Little historical sidebar. When I was in Jerusalem in 2018, we were shown all these burial boxes. I'll pop it up on the screen. Bone boxes that people's bones were kept in after death. But in 1990, archaeologists were stunned by a discovery that actually confirmed Caiaphas's existence in a very physical way. Workers were widening a road in Jerusalem's Peace Forest when they dug into a large cavernous burial site, and they found a family tomb that had been covered for many centuries, had been lost from history, and a particularly ornate ossuary, particularly ornate bone box, and clearly dated to the time of the 1st century, and clearly because it was so ornate, belonging to a rich man, inscribed with the Joseph, son of Caiaphas. And that's the name that Josephus gives to Caiaphas. And so the scientists, you can Google this, bones of Caiaphas, you'll find all the details, but they've examined the bones, they've determined that they were the bones of a 60-year-old man who lived in the 1st century, a rich man, rich family, almost certainly the Jewish high priest Caiaphas. And it's the oldest ossuary of a known person found in Israel's history. Now, so we've got corrupt Caiaphas. Still in 57, the insecure, self-interested, cunning scribes and elders. We see them acting in their self-interest. We see them self-protecting their positions. We see them as cunning. We see them as fanatics. There's 70 on the Sanhedrin, although only a quorum of 23 is required for a verdict. It's not clear how many there were there that night. And then the third person I want to note is, I'm going to call him half-hearted Peter, following at a distance. Verse 58, Peter was following him at a distance, right to the high priest's courtyard. Next week, we're looking at Peter's betrayal of Jesus 3 times, cock crows. I just want to note that, though, that betrayal starts with at a distance. Starts with coming with him, but not all the way. And that distancing myself, that not running right alongside him. And I just want to, just as an aside, note the pastoral issue that I raised last week, that some of our members over the last 12 months engaging less frequently in church, just distancing. I mean, Peter's problem, it ends up in betrayal, but it starts with him distancing. He follows at a distance. And so last character in this narrative today is Jesus. They are looking for false evidence to throw at Jesus. 59, the chief priests, the whole Sanhedrin, were looking for false testimony against Jesus so that they could put him to death. Feel the weight of this. The court that is supposed to be there to uphold justice is intentionally seeking false testimony. But they, 60, could not find any, even though many false witnesses came. They had people bringing false testimony, but this person disagreed with this person. The false witness was not credible. Finally, 2 came forward. You need 2 witnesses according to the Jewish Torah for a conviction, and so I'm in 61. 2 came forward, stated, this man said, I can destroy the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days. Now, there's a charge. Is it true? The character of the people is to be false witnesses. Did Jesus say that? Well, there's no reference to any incident where Jesus remotely said anything like that in Matthew's account of Jesus' life. But there is a reference in John's biography of Jesus. So just go Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and come forward to John chapter 2. And in John chapter 2, verse 13, the Jewish Passover was near. So Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple, he found people selling oxen, sheep, and doves. He found the money changers sitting there. After making a whip out of the cords, he drove everyone out of the temple with their sheep and oxen. He poured out the money changers' coins. He overturned the tables. He told those who were selling doves, get these things out of here. Stop turning my Father's house into a marketplace. And his disciples remembered that it is written, zeal for your house will consume me. The Jews replied to him, what sign will you show us for doing these things? It's interesting. This area, the temple courtyard, it's as big as the Sydney cricket ground. So you've just got to picture the whole Sydney cricket ground filled with glebe markets. So it's that kind of thing. And Jesus, with a whip, clears glebe markets across. I mean, I could imagine somebody with a machine gun clearing glebe markets, the whole Sydney cricket ground with. But to clear the markets with a whip. And they say, by what authority do you do this? See that line? Verse 18, what sign will you show us for doing these things? Show us that you've got the power to do it. I just did it, you goose. I mean, that's how I would be thinking. That's not what Jesus says. Look what he responds as, verse 19. Destroy this temple and I'll raise it up in 3 days. Now, that's not quite what the false accusers say that Jesus said, but it's kind of, you can see where they got it from. So let's go back now to Matthew 26. And verse 60, finally two who came forward said, "This man said, I can destroy the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days." Now, the actual quote from Jesus was, "You destroy the temple. If the temple is destroyed, I'll raise it in 3 days." Perhaps Jesus is alluding to this moment back in John 2. Perhaps also, and this is one to reflect on, back in Jeremiah 7, and you can read this later, Jeremiah 7, long time earlier, it was predicted that the Jewish temple leadership would go AWOL from God. They'd all reject God, and if the leadership of the temple all rejected God, then God would destroy the temple. And so perhaps the line the false testimony guys are picking up on is that, well, if Jesus is God's right-hand guy and all the temple people are corrupt, well, Jesus might be saying, I/God will destroy you, the temple. That's the allegation that's put against Jesus. And what does he do? Well, verse 62, the high priest stood up and said to him, "Do you have an answer? Don't you have an answer to what these men are testifying against you?" But Jesus kept silent. Now, usually it's guilty people who stay silent. But Jesus remains silent. He's the best communicator in history. He's amazed the teachers of the law when he was 12. Of course he could have given a reply right now that would have stopped his accusers in their tracks. But Jesus knows it's the Father's will for him to die. So it would be crazy for him to answer his accusers, to expose their error, and not do the Father's will. What would have been the point? To have outsmarted these guys and then he wouldn't have been executed? And prophet Isaiah, 850 years before, he said, he, the servant, was oppressed and afflicted, yet did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, as a sheep before her shearers is silent. So right here, verse 63, Jesus kept silent. Isaiah 53 comes true. So the high priest, still in 63, says, "I charge you under oath by the living God. Tell us if you're the Messiah, the Son of God." Under oath. What are you going to do? For Jesus to ignore the request would be to break a legally imposed oath, would be contempt of court, contempt of official Judaism. And actually, given that the high priest in the eyes of the Jewish people represents the living God, for Jesus to defy the under oath statement of the high priest would be for Jesus to defy the living God. He's got to give an answer. But the question is, let's look at the question here, verse 61. Tell us if you are the Messiah. Let's do Messiah first. Tell us if you are the Messiah. Now, I put up on the screen the line, the word Christ in Greek is equal to Messiah in Hebrew, which means king, genuine ruler. And the other term to get used for that is Son of God. So, however, when you see Son of God, we're not thinking God the Son. When we hear the term God the Son, we're meaning second person of the Trinity, God the Father, God the Son, God the Spirit. When you hear the term Son of God, well, it's really an appointed one of God, a deputy to God, a right hand of God, not second person of the Trinity. Now, we know that those guys are the same person from hindsight. But when Caiaphas is saying, tell us if you are the Messiah, he's mean, tell us if you're the Christ, tell us if you're the King, the Son of God, the one from God, the right-hand one to God, the Messiah. He's not meaning tell us if you're the second person of the Trinity. But he is putting that question, are you the Messiah? Are you that guy, the one who's going to come on behalf of God to put things right? And verse 64, Jesus stops them in their tracks. Are you the Christ? You have said it. Second time in this chapter that Jesus has said, you have said it. Earlier, Jesus was in this interaction. One of you will betray me. Is it me, said Peter? Is it me, said James? Is it me, said Matthew? Is it me, said Judas? Is it me, Lord? Am I the one who's going to betray you? And Jesus looks at Judas and gives the affirmative. You have said it. And so here we are an hour later when the high priest says, are you the Messiah, the Son of the living God? You have said it. So what do we say at this point? Jesus is the Christ, the Messiah, the ruler, the King, the Son of the living God, God's right-hand guy. But then Jesus just blows them apart at this next line. He goes further. I tell you, in the future, you will see the Son of Man seated on the right hand of power, coming on the clouds of heaven. With all that knowledge of Daniel 7 that I gave you before, when you've got all the chaos of the different rulers, the Romans, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Jewish, even the Jewish temple structure. And Jesus says, I'm the Son of Man of Daniel 7. I'm the fulfillment of that prophecy. I'm the one who's going to stand before the Ancient of Days on the very last day as the universe is judged. I'm the one who's going to come with the clouds in glory. I'm the one that the Ancient of Days is going to give glory and authority and sovereign power, and all nations and all men of every language will worship him. I'm the one who's going to have an everlasting dominion that will not pass away and a kingdom that will not be destroyed. I am the one who is the Son of Man. I am the one to whom every knee will bow, either in grateful adoration or in bitter crushed defeat. And by implication, crooked Caiaphas, you, one of the beast usurpers, will ultimately be judged by me. That's what he says in verse 64. That's the implication that the theologically astute Caiaphas would have picked up. Caiaphas is horrified. 65, the high priest tore his robes. He has blasphemed. Why do we need witnesses? You've heard the blasphemy. What is your decision? Now, I take it the Sanhedrin had the same theological read as Caiaphas, and so they are cunning, they are self-interested. They answered, he deserves death. Then they spat in his face and beat him, and others slapped him, said, prophesy to us, Messiah, what is it that hit you? That last line, I'll just clean that up for you. I didn't read the significance of this at first, but as I thought about it, if you've been reading through Matthew's Gospel, you'd remember back to Matthew 9 and verse 20. There's a woman who had an issue of blood who touches the garment of Jesus. And the whole narrative stops and Jesus turns around and he says, who touched me? He knows who touched her. And he knows why she touched her. He has that supernatural knowledge going on, and these guys are slapping him and spitting in his face and saying, who spat? Who slapped? Prophesy, who hit you? He knows. He knows exactly. Their dare, their insult. Of course Jesus knows the person who affronted him. Now, I want to come from the first century all the way back to us. And if I started with this question, what is your decision? I thought about it. I thought it's potential that there are three different perspectives in the room this morning. And two of them I say, don't be like crooked Caiaphas. Don't be cunning, self-interested Sanhedrin. And it could be that you could be here, and with all that evidence, you're still pushing him away, not recognising that he's the one who will ultimately judge you. And then the next one not to be like is actually don't be half-hearted Peter. Don't be follow at a distance, half-hearted Peter. The right response to this revelation is to recognise that this guy Jesus, in the dock that day, is the one who will ultimately come on the clouds, the one who will ultimately judge each one of us, the one ultimately to whom we must all give an account. And so the high priest puts the question, what is your decision? Now, I'm not at this point being asked as a reader to decide on the guilt or innocence of Jesus. I don't think that's where the writer is going in that question. I mean, the Caiaphas is going that way, but Matthew's not going that way. You and I as readers, we know the court process stinks. We are being prompted to make an assessment on the identity of Jesus. And really we're being prompted to decide, is Jesus right in verse 64? In verse 64, when he says, in the future you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven. Is Jesus the one who will come judge crooked Caiaphas? Is Jesus the one who will come judge you and me? I said at the start that this miscarriage of justice was worse than the Chamberlain case. Why did I say that? Well, I'll just tell you about another miscarriage of justice. It was the first time I was given the strap in high school. This is in the days when corporal punishment... I mean, Hal came up to me this morning and said, oh, it was a lovely story, Dominic, that I told about saving that person's life when I was in high school. This is an opposite kind of story this morning. The first time in year 7 that I got corporal punishment, I mean, I don't know when they stopped doing corporal punishment in high school, but I went to a Catholic school, so we kept on doing it years after the government one stopped. Anyway, hands out, belted. I was caught talking in class when we were explicitly told not to be talking in class. And when I protested my innocence, and actually I was innocent that day, I wasn't actually talking that time, the teacher said, Dominic, you have almost been caught for talking so many times. And he was right, even if I wasn't actually guilty that time. So many other times I'd done the wrong thing. Lindy Chamberlain didn't murder her baby, but she wasn't perfect. She did other things wrong. Nothing to justify the conviction she received, but she wasn't perfect. Whereas Jesus, this guy, convicted that day, was perfect. Always innocent, always honouring God. That's why this miscarriage of justice is bigger than any other. For what we're going to see the next few weeks is that the perfectly innocent one was executed. But now, perfectly innocent, executed in our place, takes our punishment, but now comes on the clouds to judge us. And will we see that that is true? He's the Saviour and now the risen Lord. What is your decision?